as previously James just introduced me, I was the PM for growth at SoundCloud, and today I'm leading the growth efforts for Yay. Wait a second, let me figure this out. Here we go. What is Yay for you, those of you who don't know? Yay is a shopping app for Gen Z specifically. We also target millennials every now and then, but we are really focused on Gen Z. And what we allow is to celebrate the products you love and like using video, because we believe video is the most important format for this generation. I'm also a growth consultant. This is my Twitter. Feel free. Let's start. So I'll quickly today outline a specific problem that I've seen over the past few years. That problem has a very specific, it comes about in a very specific context, in the onboarding phase. Then we'll take a step aside quickly, talk a little bit about Gen Z and how these challenges are reflected in this demographic. And I'll try to bring it all together and kind of sum it up and tell what we did in order to counter the problems and issues that we saw. So, to start with, and that is nothing revolutionary. I think most of us here have tackled that problem at some point, and that is to figure out what new users want. There are many ways of doing it. And that starts with a simple truth, and that is that most users don't find your app useful. Unless you're Facebook or maybe Instagram and Snapchat, your retention is probably below 50% for new users. That's if users open your app, which is also a substantial percentage. And that could happen for a few reasons. First, and that is a user acquisition issue, is that your app is not useful to the users who just came into your app. You've acquired the wrong users, the wrong demographic, you targeted the wrong group. The second problem is that the user come in, they have a certain context, they have a certain expectation in mind when they come in to find certain type of things. And they can't find what they're looking for. Now when we look at that, that means that a user has a preconception of what your app is about, right? But it also means that when they come in, they need to have some kind of a known context. Users love new content. They would like to probably discover something new as they use your app. But they have to start somewhere that is known to them and they can start. And lastly, that is more of an engagement issue, I would say, and usually not on the, let's say, session 1 or session 2. And this is that users are not aware of new content that is discoverable through your app. Right, so we can look at that as some kind of a waterfall, as a life cycle waterfall for user. Now, what do new users want? And I've seen that in my work as a consultant and obviously the various companies that I worked for. And that is, I think, that most users, the vast majority of users want something that is known. That means that they have, as we said, a preconception of what your app is about, what kind of content they can find on your app. And when they come in, they expect to find it to a large extent. There is, though, always a small group of users. From what I can see, around 5 to 20%, depends on your market, depends on where you're playing. And these are users that are much more adventurous. They're willing to go through a process that might be a little bit more tedious. They are willing to give you time to try and find new types of content. And they are much more interested in finding these things. And then there's the third category, and that is the users that are simply looking for a passive experience, meaning that whatever you put in front of them, they'll interact with them. Obviously, retention on these users might be a little bit more challenging. Now, all that come into place in a very specific context, and that is onboarding, as we said. And here we go. Simple truth, I think, again, nothing that is revolutionary here, and that is that we are all want to move this retention graph, this good old retention graph. And how do we do that? In most apps, it means to put in front of users engaging content. The more a user engages with content, the more likely they are to be retained in whatever graph you see. These slightly fake data, I'm sorry, I had to change it a little bit, is from SoundCloud specifically. Very clear correlation. The more they engage, the more likely they are to be retained. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we only have to put content in front of users, that they have a known context, but it has to be personalized. The expectations that user A has are different from user B. And even if it's just a little bit, even if they are sharing demographics, for instance, they would still have slightly different perceptions of the app and expectations. And therefore, a generic experience of, let's say, I'm going to put my 10 most well-performing pieces of content in front of all users, will give you generic results. Maybe you'll see a lift, but not necessarily the lift that you can achieve. Now, as I said, let's take a step aside for a second. I would like to talk about Gen Z, because that's a topic I've been heavily involved with Yay over the past year. I'm trying to understand the mindset of this generation, and I think it's of interest also to a lot of us today here. These characteristics are quite accepted today in the industry. First of all, Gen Z is a mobile-first generation. What does that mean? That they identify their mobile device as the most important device they own. 40% of them. By the way, millennials, I believe, is 37% from the research this is based on. They have no knowledge of the world without internet. That brings very specific expectations along, right? Everything needs to be a tap away. Everything needs to be there immediately and instantly. And lastly, their expectations of what content we put in front of them are very, very high and slightly different from older generations. New content and personal content is almost seen as the default experience. Now, that comes about with something that we found lately. You know how you sometimes don't understand how your parents or your grandparents even believe that ad on the web that says, win $1 million right here. For us to see that, it's obvious that this is an ad, right? We are all fluent in the internet. It's almost a bit of a joke. This generation, that's not even a question, of course, would be able to recognize a product placement on Instagram way faster than any of us in this room. Authenticity, in their eyes, is something that is not only crucial, that they expect, but they can recognize immediately a subliminal ad that was put into their favorite influencer or their favorite sports star. They have a very, 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 very high threshold when it comes to authenticity, and they see right through a lot of marketing and influencer marketing campaigns that are being run. And therefore, they put a lot of emphasis on authenticity. Now, what is Gen Z interested in? And that might be actually not very different from previous generation. Maybe it is an age thing rather than a cohort thing. What we find is that users, and by the way, the top one is the US, middle one in white is the developed world, and global at the bottom. What they're interested in the most, as you see on this list, is music. Traveling is important, food is important, gaming is important, film, sports, all that is important, but music scores significantly higher than anything else that they do. For them, it's more than just a hobby or something they do in the afternoon or do in their spare time. It's an identity pillar. It's something that is embedded in them. It defines how they interact with their friends. It defines who are their friends. It defines the social network. It defines how they see the world, what they'll shop for, and what they'll want to engage with, what kind of events they'll go to. So, with this in mind, we try to tackle the onboarding issue. How do we approach Gen Z, our app that is directed to Gen Z? And depending on who you listen to, as a teenager, as a young person, as we said, your habits, your commerce activity, what you view and what you want to purchase will be defined. If you listen to this guy, and by the way, a beer on me, if you can name the artists that I'm going to present now, you'll probably be following a specific trend and a specific type of fashion. If you follow this guy, if he is your favorite artist, then probably your interest in fashion will be along certain lines. And if you follow these guys, I expect someone here in Berlin to be able to recognize these. Again, your commerce activity will be defined a certain way. So what we saw here, what we found, is that music and music taste is more than, again, just a hobby. It's something that can help us understand the interests and the direction of the user. Now, what did we do with that? And how do we bring it together with the onboarding issue that we talked about before? If you have a B2C app, or a C2C app, you probably have these 4 features. Maybe you have more, but probably you have this. Some kind of an algorithmically generating algorithm that allows you to suggest content to users. Maybe it's curated and without an algorithm, but you probably have some kind of a feature along these lines. You have a home experience where users can probably consume content quickly. Notifications, and with notifications I mean across the board, in-app, push, emails, text, whatever. And some kind of feed experience, some kind of infinite scroll that you can go through content continuously. What you also have, most likely, is access to these predictors. These are relatively technical pieces of information. The device, the languages installed on the device, the network the user is using, the country, geolocation, as we said. Maybe you also have the reported the reported gender and the reported age, what platform they're on. All these together give us an image, insight into the user, into who the user is. And what do these predictors, what we found, what are those predictors, if you put them into a regression, what they predict is basically social class. And social class, if we go back to the images of these 3 very cool people back there, social class heavily correlates with your taste in music and with what kind of scene you're in. And we managed to, from using these predictors that are available for us on session number 1 in the app, to derive in a very, very high percentage what your music and taste is. And I don't mean just electronic music or pop. I mean the difference between techno and Korean pop. We managed to get really granular with, I believe, 27 different genres. So what we did is that we put a predictive model on the client that as the user opens the app for the first time and we ask the user to sign up, we already start calculating this and putting all these predictors together. This, in turn, obviously informs the home experience, what the user will see in a few seconds as they enter the app for the first time, and their feed, which in our case was the singular experience. Obviously, at the same time, and we let that happen in batch jobs every single day, we have the predictive model on the back end where additional information comes in, right? Behavioral information that the user has just interacted with different content, maybe might have liked it, might have not. And obviously, what we know about the app in advance, what kind of content we have, what kind of content provided very good results in the past, what is engaging, what is less engaging. And in turn, also the notifications, which are extremely crucial when we look at onboarding as a continuous effort, of course, to bring the user on day 2, to bring the user back on week 2, etc. So what we managed to do here is take a combination of very technical and dry information, as we said, kind of match it together with something that we find for young people is extremely, extremely important, as we said, an identity pillar, and define from there what kind of experience and what kind of content we give to users. What kind of shoes am I going to try and sell to the user that is coming into my app? Or maybe not shoes, maybe I need to go for a purse, or maybe caps. To conclude, onboarding is a continuous effort, as I think all of us know here, and we have to continually iterating on it, and we are already trying to think how to move forward from what I just presented to you. Engagement is driven, at least from what I've seen over the years, by surfacing the best content. And by best, I don't mean what we think is the best, subjectively, and not necessarily what is the best across our entire platform, but what is the best for the specific user coming in right now into the app. Personalization is a key, especially for younger crowds. As we said before, it's something that is taken for granted. And if we're trying to tap into social behaviors if we're trying to make users share content with their user afterwards and with their friends and bring more friends into the app, if we're trying to create some kind of a network effect here, we have to think in more terms than just a user is interested in A or B. We need to think in terms of what encapsulates the social environment of the user. What do they care about the most? What is something that they would feel comfortable using their social network to bring into? That's it. I'll be outside afterwards. If you have any questions or want to further discuss, please feel free. I'll be very, very happy. And have a wonderful day.